Today I want to focus on laying out our 4 priorities for the continent as articulated in President Obama's new strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, which was released last week. Our 4 priorities are the following: strengthening democratic institutions, spurring economic growth, trade, and investment, advancing peace and security across the continent, and promoting opportunity and development. Let me go into a little bit of detail about each of these priorities and afterwards take some questions from you. Our first priority on the continent is working to strengthen democratic institutions. A key element in Africa's transformation is a sustained commitment to democracy, to rule of law, to constitutional norms, and respect for human rights. Africa has made significant progress in this area over the past 2 decades, and since the early 1990s, dozens of African states have moved quietly from dictatorship to democracy in one of the most impressive political transformations in recent history. We have seen this progress continue over the past 2 years. This past March in Senegal, we witnessed a peaceful transition of power from one of Africa's longest-serving presidents to a new democratically elected government. Over the last 24 months, we have seen successful democratic elections carried out in Nigeria, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Zambia, and Benin, and a number of other countries. And in Niger and Guinea-Conakry, we witnessed successful elections in 2 countries that had previously been governed by military regimes. Despite the progress that we have all witnessed, challenges in the areas of democracy and good governance persist. The coups in Mali and Guinea-Bissau that took place in March and April were stark reminders that military interventions, coups d'etats, and other illegal transfers of government remain a threat to democracy and civilian governance on the continent. In addition, too many elections continue to be marred by intimidation, disenfranchisement of opposition parties, and poor administrative preparations. Last November, we witnessed the deeply flawed elections in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of the largest and most critically important countries in Africa. And we remain very concerned about the tendency of some leaders on the continent to cling to power for 1, 2, and sometimes 3 or 4 decades. African countries need civilian governments that deliver services to their people, independent judiciaries that enforce the law, professional security forces that respect human rights and act under democratically constitutional governments, strong and effective legislative institutions, a free and responsible press, and a dynamic civil society. All of these things underpin good democracies. We also believe there is growing evidence to suggest a strong correlation in Africa between democratic governance and improved economic performance. President Obama was clear in his speech in Accra in July 2009 that we intend to do everything we can to bring attention to corruption within African governments, and that Africans should have the right to start a business or to get an education without paying a bribe. We recognize our responsibility to support those who act responsibly and to isolate those who do not. As the President noted, with better governance, there is no doubt that Africa holds the promise of a broader base of prosperity, which brings me to the next pillar in our Africa policy. Our second priority is to spur economic growth, trade, and investment on the continent. In the economic sphere, we have seen significant progress in many parts of Africa, with a decade of sustained growth topping 5%. Countries like Mauritius, Ghana, Rwanda, Botswana, Tanzania, Uganda, Mozambique, and Cape Verde have all made significant economic strides. This is evident in our statistics and reports that we see from the World Bank, the IMF, The Economist, and other distinguished organizations. 6 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa, and Africa now has the highest rate of return on foreign direct investment of any developing region, with returns for U.S. investors hovering at approximately 25% since 1990. In the next 8 years, the consumer, agricultural, mineral, and infrastructure sectors could be worth an estimated $2.6 trillion across Africa. Africa's rapid economic growth also reveals how much more must be done to enhance Africa's role in the global economy. Africa's stature, Africa's share of world trade is only 2% of global trade. In most cases, Africa's tremendous wealth and mineral resources has not translated into greater prosperity for its people. In the technical area, Africa faces a massive digital divide with the rest of the world, which inhibits the ability of African companies to compete on the global stage. To help turn this situation around, we want to promote greater U.S. trade and investment in Africa, assist Africa in addressing some of its infrastructure and energy challenges, and help Africa to strengthen regional economic and commercial integration. We are working to attract U.S. companies to invest in Africa's agricultural, infrastructure, and energy sectors. The State Department recently led its first energy trade mission with 10 U.S. companies to promote investment in the power sector in Mozambique, Tanzania, Ghana, and Nigeria. We intend to do more such trade missions in the future. We are also committed to working with our African partners to maximize the opportunities created by the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides some 40 African countries with duty-free access for 6,000 product lines into the United States. AGOA is producing real results, and the statistics prove it. Since its enactment in the year 2000, two-way trade between the United States and Africa has grown to $82.1 billion in 2010, and AGOA exports to the United States have increased to $44.3 billion. The annual AGOA Forum, which met last week here in Washington, is and remains an important part of our trade policy. And this week, we will hold the U.S.-Africa Business Conference in Cincinnati, Ohio, which will be focused on infrastructure and energy. Our third priority is advancing peace and security on the continent. Advancing peace is critical to strengthening our priorities, since conflicts destabilize states and borders, stifles economic growth and investment, and robs young Africans of the opportunity for an education and a better life. There has been a noticeable reduction in the number of conflicts in Africa over the past decade, but combat instability and continued political unrest persist in some areas of the continent, including the border areas between South and South Sudan, Somalia, and the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Obama administration is working with the UN, with the AU, and other members of the international community to end these conflicts so that peace and economic progress can replace instability and uncertainty. Our engagement on The situation between Sudan and South Sudan is an excellent example of our commitment to addressing conflict on the continent. Last summer, we witnessed the culmination of years of negotiations and preparations when South Sudan joined the ranks of independent nation states. Since then, we have seen this significant achievement marred by continuing levels of violence between the governments of Juba and Khartoum. Nonetheless, we believe that full-scale combat and conflict between these two countries is not inevitable, and we will continue to work closely with our international partners to urge Sudan and South Sudan to cease all hostilities and to return to the negotiating table to resolve their outstanding issues over borders, oil, citizenship, and security. Our commitment to addressing conflict is also reflected in our engagement in Somalia, where we have supported the transitional federal government and the African mission in Somalia in their efforts to stabilize the country and expand the reach of the legitimate government. We have supported the Somali National Army and AMISOM forces as they have worked to push the terrorist organization Al-Shabab from the capital of Mogadishu and other key cities in southern and central Somalia. And we will continue to provide support to these forces as they work to consolidate their security gains. With the approach of the end of the transitional phase, we are working closely with our partners in the international community to urge the signatories to the roadmap for ending the transition to complete the key tasks under the roadmap by August 20th. We are encouraged that the roadmap signatories include not just the transitional federal government, but also the Puntland, Galmudug, and Asuna Wal Jamaa movement as well. The roadmap presents a convergence of two tracks of our dual-track policy. We truly believe that the coming months present the greatest opportunity in a generation to bring about lasting peace and security in Somalia. Critical to our ability to address both current and future conflicts on the continent is our effort to support African peacekeeping forces. We're building African peacekeeping capabilities at three different levels: at the African Union headquarters, in sub-regional organizations, and at the level of individual member states. At the African Union, we are providing advisors and equipment to the AU's Planning and Operations Unit. At the sub-regional level, the Department of State and the Department of Defense have supported multinational exercises for ECOWAS and for the Eastern Brigade Standby Force. We also have provided an advisor to ECOWAS headquarters in Abuja. At the level of individual member states, we are focused on building the capacity of our African partners to contribute to the UN and AU peacekeeping operations in and outside of Africa. The centerpiece of this effort is the African Contingency Operations Training and Assistance Program called ACOTA, which provides training to peacekeepers in some 25 African countries and which has trained over 195,000 peacekeepers since its inception. We are also providing the tools our African partners need to address less traditional transnational threats, including terrorist organizations and maritime security. Maritime security is important, and we are helping to improve the capabilities of African navies and coast guards through programs like AFRICOM's African Partnership Station, which brings together U.S. military personnel and experts from across the U.S. government to train and mentor African military and Coast Guard personnel. The United States government has also provided coastal patrol craft and radar systems to strengthen maritime domain awareness. We are strongly committed to assisting African countries to increase their capacity to address the immediate threats posed by terrorist organizations and prevent terrorists from using the region to recruit, seek sanctuary, or secure resources and financing. Our two primary mechanisms for addressing the threat posed by terrorism are the Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Program and the Partnership for Regional East African Counterterrorism. These two programs mobilize resources and expertise from multiple U.S. government agencies in order to assist our African partners in building the security sector capacity that they need to extend effective government control over remote areas and also to address the underlying issues of radicalization. Our final priority is promoting opportunity and development on the continent. Nowhere else in the world is development more critical to our engagement than in Africa. The new U.S. government approach to development focuses on sustainable development outcomes as well as new operational models for U.S. development assistance. I want to provide a few examples of this development approach this afternoon. One of our key development initiatives is the Global Health Initiative, which commits U.S. support to fight disease and to improve African health care systems. Strengthening public health is critical if we are to work together to bring about a more stable and prosperous Africa. Sick men and women cannot work or contribute to the growth of a nation's economy. They cannot serve in the armed forces or police, and they cannot provide for the security of their families or their country. The Global Health Initiative focuses on country ownership through support for country-led national health plans. The initiative integrates many of our health programs on malaria, tuberculosis, HIV prevention, and collaborates effectively with African governments to build and improve their health systems by training health workers, repairing health clinics and hospitals, and improving procurement systems for drugs and other medical equipment. All of these things are important in improving the health of Africa's citizens. The Global Health Initiative builds on the successes of President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, the President's Malaria Initiative, and the Neglected Tropical Diseases Program. Through the work of PEPFAR, the U.S. is directly supporting life-saving providing antiretroviral treatment for nearly 4 million individuals, the vast majority of whom are in Africa. The United States is also the largest donor to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, having provided more than $5.8 billion to this very powerful multilateral partner in the global health field. Equally important to our shared objective of building a stronger and more prosperous Africa is addressing the threat of food insecurity. The cornerstone of our effort to address food insecurity on the continent is the Feed the Future program, which is currently active in some 12 African countries. We see Feed the Future as advancing stability and prosperity by improving the most basic of human conditions, the need for reliable sources of quality food and sufficient resources to purchase it. Through Feed the Future, the U.S. government is renewing its commitment to agriculture as a vehicle for sustainably reducing hunger and poverty by harnessing the power of the private sector and the research to transform agricultural development in sectors with high potential to increase incomes among small farmers. In addition, at last month's G8 summit here in Washington, we launched the new Alliance for Food Security Partnership between the G8 and African countries, currently Tanzania, Ghana, and Ethiopia, and about 45 multinational and African companies that have agreed to invest in African agriculture to lift some 50 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years. This can be accomplished by aligning the commitments of African governments to implement effective country plans and policies for food security and nutrition, the commitments of the private sector to increase investments where the conditions are right, and the commitments of the G8 countries to expand Africa's potential for rapid and sustainable agricultural growth. The partnership builds on the commitment leaders made at the 2009 G8 meeting to put a focus on fighting hunger at the forefront of the global effort by leaders. We have specifically designed some elements of our development policy to empower marginalized parts of African society. We are working with African women entrepreneurs to accelerate the growth of their businesses and their export capacity and their communities. And we are working with young African leaders and young African entrepreneurs who will use their creativity and energy and new technologies to develop more jobs and prosperity for their communities. Once again, I want to thank Ambassador Bellamy and ACS for the opportunity to take part in this seminar and to share with you information about the 4 pillars that are the guideposts for carrying out our policies across the continent. I'm extremely pleased to be with you all this afternoon and would be more than happy to take a few questions now. Thank you.